Welcome to Beyond the Safety Net. This is Inger.
And I'm Dana.
And we are communication specialists with the Department of Public Safety in Cobb County, and we are excited to bring this next episode to you. But before we get started, what we'd like you to do is hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to this podcast. We would love for you to subscribe and give us a 5-star review.
And we're joined here today by Police Major George Mestre. It's so nice to have you on this episode today, Major. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great. Thank you. I'm honored to have been asked to do this with you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, we are very excited. We want to ask you a little bit about just your career, a little bit about your life, and just kind of start from there.
Gotcha. Yeah, exactly. What led you to this point and that sort of thing. In the interest of full disclosure, he used to be our manager. So,
seems like a lifetime ago.
Right? It absolutely does.
So we're triple excited to have you here. So tell us a little bit about what led you into law enforcement.
So I grew up one of those typical kids, always playing with police cars and fire engines and playing cops and robbers. And it was in a time where it was cool to be a police officer. However, you grow up and you go to high school and you decide that you're going to go to college and go a different way. I left college early and was kind of jumping around between jobs, and there was an application for a police department in Northern Virginia that was looking for Spanish-speaking officers. They were specifically hiring Spanish-speaking officers. And again, this was in an era where it was very difficult. It was very competitive to get a police officer job. So I took the application and went with it and ended up getting hired by that agency.
So let's backtrack a little bit. I'm assuming you're not from the state of Georgia.
I am not from the state of Georgia. I was actually born in Puerto Rico. My mother is Puerto Rican. My dad is Cuban. Born in Puerto Rico, lived in Puerto Rico till I was about 6, 7 years old. My first language is Spanish. And we did the typical Puerto Rican family move to New York. Lived in New York for a couple of years before we moved to Washington, D.C. suburbs outside of D.C., and I was pretty much raised in Northern Virginia.
Okay. So that's why you chose that department.
It was close to home.
So what made you make the change to Cobb, and when did you make the change to Cobb?
So in 1997, at the time I got married, and my wife was from Atlanta. And we made a conscious decision to move to Atlanta, closer to her family. My family was looking to relocate to Atlanta as well for jobs. And I ended up here in 1997. Before I moved there, I applied to 2 departments. Being someone in law enforcement for a while, you know what you want out of a police department.
And what are those things that someone should look for out of a police department?
So it's so unique because it's so personal to the individual. There's some officers that thrive in a smaller department that's more family-oriented, where everybody knows everybody, and it's a smaller jurisdiction, a smaller geographic jurisdiction. However, for me, I came from a smaller jurisdiction, but it was very urban. It was a city. But I wanted something a little different. I wanted the opportunity to move to different precincts if I wanted to. I wanted the opportunity to police in different environments if I wanted to. And I wanted the opportunity to go to different units. So I did a lot of research, and there's only 2 departments I applied for. I applied for Gwinnett County, and I applied for Cobb County, and they're very similar in size and what they offer. And ultimately, obviously, I landed in Cobb County, which maybe I'm biased, but I feel it is all around better agency. I feel fortunate to be here.
So what all have you done in Cobb County? What led you to, you're up there in the ranks, so what all have you done?
So when you get hired, obviously as a police officer, the first thing you do is you are assigned as a patrol officer and you start at a precinct. I first started policing in Precinct 2, which is in South Cobb area. Very diverse community. I was able to use my language skills daily, and very busy precinct.
Were you there a minimal amount of time compared to a new recruit because you came from another department?
I was. The department I came with 7 years experience, and I had very diverse experiences in that department too, from community police officer, I was a bicycle officer, I worked some homicide, I worked narcotics, undercover narcotics, I worked in a street crimes unit. So I had a lot of experience there. So when I came here to Cobb, they don't like you to transfer into a specialized unit until you have about 2 years experience. But you compete for those jobs and you interview, and they take the best fit for that job. So in 1999, I interviewed for a job with the Crimes Against Children unit. And at the time, they didn't have a Spanish speaker in there, and that was a need. I spent 4 years in that unit. And with everything that I've done and with the police department, that is probably the most rewarding thing I've done. You actually made a difference. Yeah, narcotics is fun, and all the other assignments are fun, but you actually make a difference in crimes against children.
How did you handle dealing with those crimes and that kind of crime every day, seeing that? How did you kind of balance that?
So it's interesting because if you speak to the typical police officer, I could never do that. I could never see that. I could never do that. I'll tell you a funny story. When I actually went to that job, I didn't think it was going to be all that busy. I don't know if it's being naive or just don't realize it, or things like that don't happen in Cobb. It was very eye-opening to realize just how busy and how children are victimized. It's very eye-opening. For me personally, I felt that the victims that couldn't really fight for themselves needed an advocate, needed somebody to fight for them. And yeah, it's very easy to be in a room with somebody who perpetrated evilness on a child and want to do evil to them, right? But I had a job, and I knew that if I did my job right, that person would spend either the rest of their life or a long portion of their life in prison and not be able to do that to somebody else. So that's how I got through it.
How was the work-life balance? Because you mentioned you had a family. Around what age were your kids? Or
So my daughter was born in 1999, and at the time I was in Crimes Against Children when she was born. And that was very challenging. It's very eye-opening to see who perpetrates on children. And it's very hard to see a father, like even a natural father, not a stepdad, a natural father physically, sexually abuse their children. And initially going into a unit like that where you don't think those types of crimes happen as routinely as they really do, you kind of internalize that and you live it. You look at family members maybe a little bit more suspiciously. You go to the park and you look at people a little bit more suspiciously. And that really is a burden. It's a hard unit to be at.
you think you parented a little differently because of that unit?
100%. And not only did I parent a little bit different, I felt like I went overboard in a negative way. And I'll give you an example. My parents are fantastic people. My dad is an amazing grandparent. He's so great with kids. He was great with all my cousins, with me. And my parents would watch my daughter. And I came home one day and I asked, hey, where's my daughter? And my mom's like, oh, she's upstairs watching TV with your dad. And I'm like, in the bedroom? And she's like, yeah. And it was completely innocent. And I got really upset. I'm like, that's inappropriate, this and that. And that was the overboard part of it. You know, my dad was not doing anything wrong. It just is, you get that in your mentality. Eventually, when you get out of that unit, you don't realize just how much it affects you negatively until you're actually out. And your family tells you that you're different in a better way. Your friends tell you you're different in a better way, and you actually realize it. And that is something that anybody who's worked, specifically crimes against children, will tell you, hey, I didn't know I was this, I don't want to say messed up, but that I was this affected by the types of cases that I'm investigating.
How long did it take you to really get out of there? I know you leave one day, but how was it, a year?
No, probably 6-ish months or so. You kind of figure it out. And you're like, everybody is not a child molester. Everybody does not physically abuse kids. And being in law enforcement is you're suspicious of people anyway. You put them in crimes against children, it just amplifies it. And it was good to get out of that unit.
So what did you go to after that?
So I got promoted to sergeant out of that unit. I ended up going to Precinct 3, which is the Cumberland Mall, Smyrna area, which ultimately ended up being my favorite precinct.
Why?
The beauty of Precinct 3 is it's so diverse in what you can do. And Precinct 3 is the smallest precinct, but you've got the east side, which today encompasses Truist Park, Cumberland Mall, the Galleria, all of those businesses right there, 285, 75. So you can, if you work in that area, you've got much more commercial presence. You've got a lot of apartments, and you can meet with businesses. You can meet with mall personnel, and you can focus on that. Then you have the west side, and the west side is over near Windy Hill Road, Austell Road, and it's different. It's a lower income neighborhood, a lot of Hispanic neighborhood, a little bit more crime in that neighborhood. So what's great about, in my eyes, about that precinct is that you can have two different styles of law enforcement and two different styles of what I call beyond law enforcement, which is not traffic stops, not arresting people. It is interaction with, you can either have interactions with the businesses and the apartment complexes on one side, or you can actually have interaction with families and children and schools on the other side. And it's two different styles of policing. I love precinct.
So I shouldn't ask you what precinct you're at now.
I'm currently at Precinct 5.
Do you love that one as well?
I do. And it is very different. So I've worked at every precinct. So I'll talk about 5 now, or I can talk about it later.
I'll talk about it later. Let's go in order.
Okay. So from that position, I went back to Precinct 2 as a detective sergeant. I went back into the criminal investigations unit over there as a sergeant to a precinct that was plagued with residential burglaries very badly. It was so bad that we had to initiate special task force to address it. I was very fortunate I wasn't part of the task force, but I was very fortunate to provide intelligence and guidance to that unit that was able to go out there. It was very successful. Anybody who's worked here will remember the BAT unit, the burglary apprehension team. So it does not exist today.
BAT unit.
BAT.
Was that a
Wow.
unit that you created just specifically for that?
I did not create it. It was part of probably at the time, it was probably the precinct commander there that it's probably a joint decision. But it was recognized that there was a need to do something in that area because the numbers were astronomical of burglaries. I don't work that area now, so I don't know what those numbers are in relation to today, but back then they were huge. And they were so impactful with that it was an all-time low for burglaries. So that was what that unit focused on. Was the criminal investigation unit focuses more on property crimes, thefts, things that aren't against a person, like violence against a person, assaults and stuff.
Why was it so high at the time?
So you never know what is going to start a trend. And I'll talk about that when we get to a different one because there was another trend back then. But for whatever reason, these juveniles, high school students, they would skip school and they'd break into homes. So those were the suspects that were doing this for a while. And that is what was exciting, or that's what their criminal enterprise thought that they could benefit from at the time.
So what did you go on to do after that? I hear that you're a very interesting person, which is why we invited you here today. You've worn very, very, very many hats.
Thank you. I've not heard that before, that I'm very interesting. You may have to edit this. I'm trying to think where I went out of this.
I'm about to edit, like getting up and moving the microphone because it seems like you're having an issue.
I think I got promoted out of that unit, and I made lieutenant, and I ended up at Precinct 1. which is up in North Cobb, Kennesaw, Acworth, Town Center Mall, Traffic Central. And although it was interesting up there because of the traffic,
Imagine it now.
it's horrible. It was horrible back then, but I didn't love it as much as some of the other precincts. And I spent a very short time there. There became another opening back at Precinct 3, and I came back to Precinct 3 as a lieutenant and worked on evening shift there and had a blast, almost felt like coming back home. It was nice coming back at a different rank where I was able to really delve deep with the business associations. I did a lot of community education. I would talk to homeowners associations, go to their meetings, give them crime stats. I would teach active shooter for businesses. I would meet with apartment complexes and talk about their crime stats and what they could do to better their communities. I loved it. It was a lot of fun. From that unit, I went into criminal investigations at Precinct 3, and we were talking about crime trends. You might remember back, I guess it was in the early 2010s, mid-2015 or so, the media coined the word sliders.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember those. And those were the folks that at gas stations you'd be gassing up, and while you were gassing up, you left your car unlocked, and somebody would come next to the car. They'd open the door. They'd either steal your purse or your briefcase, and they'd go. Well, that was hard enough. But then they started stealing your car. You're gassing up the car, so they'd get in. They'd slide in because you left the keys in the car. And especially today, you've got a lot of push start cars, and they would steal your cars. So that was what I was tasked with at that time. And we started an entering auto task force, and that was something that I did start. And that was very interesting because I had been out of detective work for a while, and it was almost a new style of investigations because everything was on social media. So where I grew up as an old school detective where you look at evidence, you knock on doors, you talk to people, to witnesses, these detectives are online, they're on social media, they're using
cameras.
You've got cameras, you've got Flock. So that was at the beginning of Flock, which is our license plate reader cameras. That was in the infancy of that. It was very interesting. And we started making organized crime cases out of those cases, RICO cases, because it was gangs, and it was Atlanta gangs that were coming into Cobb. They would steal a car, and then they'd use that car to perpetrate more crime. They would break into these cars to steal guns. So it was a huge gang organization that prospered from those types of things.
With such a paradigm shift from the traditional policing to now technology, social media, all that sort of stuff. How long did it take you to get up to speed? What did that look like?
So the beauty of being a lieutenant is that you're not doing the actual investigation, but you're managing the unit. So at the time, I had such a great group of detectives that ultimately what I just did is I had them tell me, I said, hey, look, if you could do anything you want with this case and how to investigate it, how would you do it? So they would tell me, and then we talked about it, and we're like, okay, how do we accomplish that? And we met with the district attorney's office. So it was a team effort because ultimately the district attorney's office is going to prosecute that case. So they have to come up with a strategy. So we have to give them the tools to be able to prosecute the case. So it was very interesting. It was something that hadn't been done before. We were charging those cases as carjacking, and we were charging those cases with organized crime, with RICO charges, which had never been done. And that really slowed it down because there were people getting significant sentences for that. And they were very violent offenders. These aren't just people stealing your purse or your briefcase. These were people who were doing that to perpetrate more violent crimes.
So would these people drop the car off in Atlanta? I mean, did we recover the people's car? Did we find them in the car? I've always been very curious about that. Do they just dump it?
So what's interesting is that they would film themselves.
Of course.
In these cars. They would film, and this is what they would do on social media.
Of course.
And this was the social media aspect of it. And you could kind of see with what they're filming what kind of car it is. So through not old school, but new school detective work, these folks were able to tell, okay, we know who this person is. We know what neighborhood they live in. So many times my detectives would call me and say, hey, it's 4 a.m, we're going to go to this neighborhood in Atlanta and try to look for this car. So we would get 4 o'clock in the morning because they're back home. They parked their car, the stolen car, and we would look for it. And granted, I don't know how they did it, but they'd find these cars. So
Social media.
Wow.
If there's no picture, then it didn't happen.
Right. These days, yeah, it didn't happen. So, yeah, with social media, and I know we're a lot more social media savvy now because it's been around longer, that sort of thing. How did the police officers, I guess, or adjust, your team, how did they adjust to that? Did they pick up really quickly on that, or were they kind of savvy with that anyway? Or?
They were younger guys. At the time I was, I don't know, had 20-something plus years experience, and you get older in a job, you're not doing it as often. So you have to rely on fresh ideas and new ideas, and and this is something the police officers are not good at. You have to be open to change, and hey, this is a little different. This isn't the way I did it, but you can't do it the way I did it anymore. That doesn't exist. Now, there's still a need to be able to do good interrogations and be able to still talk to people, which is another challenge for today's generation, the whole talking to people. But back then, I had a group of just younger detectives that were just awesome.
So it's like a master class in managing people and learning how to deal with the different generations and also trusting your people to do what they know needs to be done and just kind of giving them the tools and moving the obstacles out of the way.
You identify a goal, and then there's got to be a road to get there. And then you just provide them the tools and the guidance to properly get there and stay out of the way.
So that just kind of keeps lining up the timeline for going up the ranks. So what was next?
So out of that unit, I was promoted to captain. And
This is it. This is where we hear about us.
Right. This is where
Not
we come
quite
in.
yet. So I was assigned to East Cobb, Precinct 4. I was the assistant precinct commander out there. And I will tell you this. When I first got that assignment, I was not very excited. East Cobb, it didn't sound sexy to me at the time. But I got there and I ended up loving it. East Cobb is such a unique precinct within Cobb County. It's mostly residential. However, there's so many organizations, there's so many homeowners associations, and they're banded together. So they all talk to each other. And there's such an opportunity to reach everybody out there that I loved it. I felt like I thrived out there between the Rotary clubs, the East Cobb Business Association, all the homeowner associations. They had their own unique issues with the occasional crimes and whatnot, but it really made a difference, I think, that I was able to talk to the businesses in a really timely manner and educate the homeowners, hey, lock your cars, and it was great. The officers were fantastic out there. This was at the time where Truist or at the time SunTrust Park was being built, and there was some reorganization between beats, between Precinct 3 and 4. So that it was a very exciting time for that. I didn't last there too long. This is where you all come in.
Oh, look at that. There we are.
I was eventually transferred to the director's office as the executive officer and stepped into a role that, one, I never saw myself in, a role that I never even thought anybody else would see me in. Figured this would be an opportunity to learn, and it was very interesting. Came in during a time where there was a lot of changes. There was an interim director at the time, and I had to learn a lot of things very quickly. One of the first projects that was dropped in my lap was the redesign of the new police headquarters. The police department recently purchased a building, which is now their current headquarters, and it was pretty much vacant. Or they were vacating it, and I was kind of handed, here you go, figure it out. Thankfully, I had a lot of help with that, and we were able to design a headquarters that today is operational. It's got a real-time crime center in it. It has our crimes against persons, robbery, Viper, records, permits, technology-based crime unit, evidence.
Wow. You missed something, though.
All right. I didn't miss it. It was coming up. The other thing that got thrust into me, because at the time, I did not have any social media. So at the time, it was kind of thrown at me that, hey, you are to oversee all the social media and web pages that are under DPS. So I'm like, okay, how do I do that? I don't even have Facebook anymore. So Dana came in and gave her my phone, and she set me up with all the things.
It was quite the struggle.
And
long time on that struggle bus with social media.
And I think the phrase almost every day is like, hey, I don't want to break Facebook. I don't want to break this thing. And it was interesting. It was actually fun. Once I figured it out and once I kind of got on board, that part of the job, from what I understand, has really evolved today because if I remember correctly back then, it was Facebook and maybe Instagram. But I mean, my goodness, now it's TikTok and Snapchat. And
So since you learned so much, are you out there doing like TikTok challenges? You're growing your followers?
I'm not.
I feel like we really set you up to like thrive, like to go viral in some form. No?
No, I'm not. My motto when I was up there and I wanted you all to do your social media was I don't mind funny, but I don't like silly. And I think that that's been great. There's been a handful of social media posts that are funny that I like. But no, we were never going to put our chief to dance and sing or something.
No, there were some counties that went viral during that time.
To me, that was silly. And maybe for the chief at the time was not the best way to go.
So again, let's backtrack because there's something you did miss.
What did I miss?
I've heard that you used to be a crisis negotiator.
Well, I did.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about that time in your career?
So I'll have to go all the way back to 1992.
Ooh, olden days.
One of those jobs that popped up when I worked in Virginia that looked very interesting to me. And at some point, most police officers kind of realize, hey, I'm more of a uniform kind of guy. I want to go out and work STEP, our traffic enforcement unit. I want to stay in uniform. I want to be SWAT. You kind of find your pathway. I always felt I was more like a detective-oriented person, and I was going down that road. So in 1992, I tried out for the Crisis Negotiation Unit in Virginia, and I made that unit. I became a leader eventually in that unit. Again, I worked in an urban environment back then, so we negotiated pretty often, and it was very exciting. It was fun just to learn how to actively listen, to make a difference, and I'll get into another aspect of it in a minute, but I left that agency as a negotiator. Again, I started here in 97, and in 1999, I came on the team. And in 1999, we had a very, very horrible incident where 2 SWAT officers got killed. So I came on the team, can't remember, it's either shortly after that or shortly before that. And the goal for negotiations for me has always been to try to resolve something with words as opposed to trying to put folks in danger. And I'm not foolish enough to think that there isn't a need for a SWAT team to go in. Of course there is. However, if for some reason we could talk to somebody and have them surrender peacefully, to me it's always supersedes somebody actually physically going into an unknown with a violent person where somebody could get hurt. So.
And when you say crisis negotiation, you're talking obviously SWAT hostage situations. Are you also talking about people who might commit suicide? Or?
Yeah, so crisis negotiation is the newer term. It's not new anymore, but when I first started, we were hostage negotiators. Okay. You watch the movies, that's what they're called, the hostage negotiators. But absolutely, people in any type of crisis, many times we've negotiated with somebody wanting to kill themselves. You try to move them past the now. One of the common statements is you're making a permanent decision on a temporary problem. So you try to move them past the, hey, what is going on right now so they can see a future.
So we know that crimes against children left a lasting effect on you. I mean, you remember all of that. Is there something you recall when you were a crisis negotiator that kind of stayed with you?
There have been so many different instances. You really just think about what could have happened if they didn't come out. There was one really bad scenario, and without going into too many details, it was a husband who took his wife hostage and was sexually assaulting her, was stabbing her at the time. And it was an apartment complex that was very hard for SWAT to get into safely. And that person was able to be talked out. Now, it took about 14 hours, but that person was able to be talked out. The wife lived, and although it was a horrific circumstance, nobody died that day. That's a big one. Lots of little ones. You talk out a dad who got fired or something, and they lived to be another day. You know, there's so many of those.
So then after, we'll fast forward again to the captain assignment, you promoted.
Well, I'll tell you one of the things that really sucked about making captain, because at the time I was the commander of the crisis negotiation team was you give that up. Once you make captain, you give up your special assignments because you have other responsibilities. Part of it is being incident commander, which is over SWAT and crisis negotiation and whatever specialized unit that's being utilized.
So do you think that there's some folks out there, even, I don't know if other agencies work the same way, but in our agency, since you're saying it does, do you think that we have folks out there that just don't want to promote up because they like their special assignment?
I think that there's people that don't want to promote up for various different reasons. That's not the only reason. And it's not even just from lieutenant to captain. It's probably from sergeant to lieutenant as well. And it's even to sergeant. There are lifelong patrol officers out there that like what they're doing. There are lifelong detectives out there that love what they're doing. Our major crimes unit, so impactful with what they do day in and day out. Our homicide detectives, our violent crime bureau. I mean, you talk about making an impact in the community, the violent crime unit, folks don't realize what they do on a day-to-day basis. There's nothing wrong with wanting to spend 20 years doing that
right.
plus. So there's a wide array of not wanting to be promoted.
But I mean, it is true. I mean, it's okay for them to stay there.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're probably still beneficial and they keep learning with each generation that comes under them, I would imagine. So.
Well, and think about it this way, too. So think about homicide detective, and we've had this, right? We've had homicide detectives that have worked here for 20 plus years, and they either promote or they come out. Because that's a high-stress situation, too. It's like crimes against children. It's high stress. You come out. Imagine the experience that you come out that leaves that unit. And imagine if 2 or 3 people leave at the same time. We've had that happen before. The amount of experience that comes out. Our STEP unit, which investigates traffic fatalities, that is a super high-stressed unit. That's what you're investigating, traffic fatalities all the time. And that is such a specialized skill because that's all math and all these kind of geometry. And I'm not even going to tell you what other kinds of math because I don't know. That's one thing I've never done with the department is traffic reconstruction.
So now into major?
So out of the director's office, I was promoted to major, and I moved to Precinct 5.
It's very sad to leave us.
Yes.
So sad. And although I had never worked at Precinct 5 before, when I was assigned at Precinct 2, there was no Precinct 5. When I first started, there's only 4 precincts. And Precinct 5 was not quite 50-50, but half of it was in Precinct 2, half of it was in Precinct 1. So I went to Precinct 5, and it was a big change for me. The homeowners associations weren't as tightly knit. The business associations weren't as needy. West Cobb is very safe. There's not a lot of crime there. So it has been a challenge for me to kind of find where I can be most beneficial. And it's been a challenge. I've kind of worked with schools a little bit, but it has. It's been very different for me. I came into the precinct in hopes to improve a lot of the morale up there, improve some of the equipment, improved a lot of the working conditions for the officers out there. I hope I've made a positive impact for the troops in the community.
So how many years total law enforcement again?
Today, 34.
How many Cobb?
27.
So how much longer?
I am currently eligible for retirement, so one day at a time. We'll see.
What is life after retirement for you? What hobbies, interests? Because you have a very long law enforcement career doing so many different things. And somewhere in there has to be time for you and family and...
So I like to think that I do not eat, live, and sleep law enforcement. I feel that I am somebody else who's actually a police officer. And I do spend a lot of time hiking, backpacking. I am a kayaker, and I just love being outside. Currently, my daughter and I have date night once a week, and my job is just something that I do, like to do Monday through Friday. Sometimes it doesn't work that way, but it's just something I do. It's not who I am.
So for a newer recruit, because you said you don't do law enforcement all the time and you have things outside, do you think that at any point when you were younger, you were that person that just kind of eat, slept, and did all things law enforcement for any amount of years?
I would like to say no, but I'm going to tell you a story. When I first started, most agencies worked 5 days on, 2 days off. Well, my agency in Virginia worked a weird schedule where I was always 3 days off. And the job was so cool that I was like, oh my God, why do we have 3 days off? I want to come back to work. That didn't last very long, right? I think I realized the benefit of being off. and being away. And I'll tell you a quick little story. When I was a lieutenant at Precinct 3, I would hear my officers talking, and I think I might even be a sergeant, and they would come to work, and I worked the evening shift. They'd come to work, they'd work their shift, they'd get off at midnight at the time, they'd go home, they'd put on Cops on TV, and they'd play Call of Duty till about 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, go to sleep, about 3-4 hours of sleep, and then they'd come back to work. And I'd hear them talking about this. And I'm like, hey, you guys need a little happy in your life. You guys, you need something outside of this. And I've always believed that. Anybody who's in this job knows that there are those that eat, sleep, breathe police. That's what they are. And it's going to be very difficult for them to find an identity outside of this job. I love my job. I love my career. I've had an opportunity to do some really cool things. We talk about being inside the yellow tape. I've spent a lifetime of inside the yellow tape doing amazing things. I do not think that I'm going to have a problem transitioning to being outside of the yellow tape. There are some that will and that have.
So no, not coming back. Nothing. Once you're done, retired, no law enforcement.
I will tell you this. Never say no, but I would rather not have to carry a gun in whatever I do past here. I don't know if I want what I call a real job with real responsibilities or a fun job that, part-time or something. Whatever it is that I do, I will work, but I don't know.
What do you suggest for those who are closer to the end of their career and they live, eat, sleep law enforcement? And then for those who are coming new into the career, what do you suggest for them so that they don't become the job?
You got to have a happy. Whatever your happy is. It could be crocheting. It could be building model airplanes, whatever it is. For me, it's outside. I even hate being on a treadmill inside. I'd rather work out outside. Whatever it is, just find something that's outside of this job. And the newer officers, I will tell you the biggest thing that I would recommend for our newer officers, and it's not really related to that. I was very fortunate when I was young that I had somebody mentor me about just saving money. When I first started, it's embarrassing how much the starting salary was, but it was nothing. And an officer who was just a little older than me and a little bit more financially savvy, he's like, just put $25 in this account. And back then, $25 is a lot of money. That's what I would recommend for younger officers. Whatever it is, something. You start saving at 20 years old, and by the time you're 50, you're going to have enough money. And don't put it off. Because I'll do it later. And the next thing you know, you're 35 and you don't have anything saved up.
The power of compound interest and time.
So kayaking. Do you go over waterfalls? I mean, are we extreme kayak? I mean, we have to tell a story about the hobby now. Is it YouTube viral worthy?
Really? This is where we're going. Okay. Yes, I've been kayaking for about...
Could have been crocheting, so...
20 years. I am a whitewater kayaker. There was a time when I was a legit Class 4 kayaker going over waterfalls, doing big water. I would probably now classify myself as a Class 3 kayaker that sometimes does Class 4. But lately, I'm not kayaking as much as I am hiking, backpacking, and that type of thing.
So do you like primitive camp?
I don't know what primitive camp is.
Is that
I'm
just
not
it's
like rubbing sticks together?
I just feel like it's like you're trying to really isolate, and that's your getaway. So is it no reception, so nobody can call you? So when you're off. I mean, they can't even really try to locate you. Is that the kind of...
All right, so I'm going to go down this rabbit hole that you're putting me in now. And if you want to edit this out, please.
We have to put in the humanizing part of everybody.
So I have a theory.
This will be good.
The body will tell you what it needs. Your body craves whatever it craves, and it will tell you.
Like $1 million.
Beauty with kayaking is that you asked about waterfalls. All right. So you're on top of a waterfall, and you're getting ready to run this waterfall. You're looking to see which line you have to go. You have to hit it perfect, or else, there's consequences. Your mind evacuates everything except that line, except what you have to do. How many strokes do I need to get there? You're not thinking about anything else. You're not thinking about your bills. You're not thinking about your daughter's homework. You're not thinking about some case that you're working on at work. It's completely gone. You're not thinking about whatever problems you have in your life. Backpacking is the opposite. It's the exact opposite. Especially when you're by yourself. When you go solo, your mind is just ruminating, and it is just thinking about not just your problems, but maybe coming up with solutions and thinking about what I can do with this and what I can do with that. I can't tell you why my body one day decided, hey, you need to start doing more backpacking than more kayaking, but that's kind of my theory. So when I look at my calendar and I see what's going on and I've got an open weekend, I might go kayaking, I might go backpacking. I guess it just depends what my body wants.
What about the bears and the snakes?
Snakes don't bother me.
Even the ones that are like poisonous?
Well, snakes aren't poisonous.
They're venomous.
I've never had a problem with snakes.
I never say.
It's kind of funny. I've got a friend of mine that I go with who is petrified of snakes. And for whatever reason, every time we go,
As he should be.
There are snakes at the campground.
I feel like Inger would be pretty petrified.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, that's a normal reaction.
Hiking in fall or spring.
So with these events, when Teresa brings her reptiles, you don't go play with the snakes and things?
I don't go play with the snakes and things.
No. I think they're fantastic to look at, and I think they're beautiful colors, and I think they're cute little creatures. But if I woke up to one in the middle of the woods, inside a tent,
that's why you don't go camping.
I'm done.
The reward for backpacking, the view, the destination, I've never had an issue with the venomous snake. Well, that's not accurate.
What about a bear?
It's interesting you said that. Never seen bear, but this
Very
last
cute.
time,
Very cute bears.
this last time we went out, we heard a bear very close by, and
Look at her face.
yeah,
She said, "Nope."
and that was a little scary.
Yeah, I bet.
A bear. No, they're cute. I see pictures of them all the time.
Pooh, Winnie the Pooh, of course.
Yeah, so he's not going to be eating honey out there. He's going to eat you.
Right.
So any other advice for somebody who's thinking about getting into law enforcement?
Like I said when I first started, each agency is a personality on its own. You need to find one that fits your personality, that if you are going to make a career out of it, jumping from agency to agency doesn't really get you anywhere, in my opinion. You should find where you're going to be. The beauty with Cobb County, you're not going to find a better training. I had a friend of mine that wanted to come into law enforcement, and he was a special forces guy in the military. He was this big gung-ho kind of guy, knew martial arts and knew all this stuff. And when I talked to him, I'm like, hey, look, I'm not worried about you, but if you go to XYZ agency, how do you know how your partner was trained? How do you know in Cobb County they've got the best training, you've got the best partners out there with you? And then, of course, the other beauty with Cobb is, and I've always said this, you can come here and all you have to buy is socks and underwear. We give you everything else. You will get everything else. And there's agencies not like that. You've got to buy your uniforms, you've got to buy your boots, socks and underwear. You're set in Cobb.
It's a good slogan.
Right.
Maybe they'll run it on a billboard.
There you go.
Good idea.
Branding.
Well, thank you for being here today, for sharing your story, for telling us about things outside of work and everything that got you to where you're at today. We appreciate you being here today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond the Safety Net. Again, leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast. And we look forward to speaking with you next week. In the meantime, have a good one.
Bye.